Good afternoon to all of you. Listen, my father was a call-responsive person. He believed that one of the things that was due to everybody was the time of day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. In fact, if my dad said good night to you and you did not say good night to him in return, you could not sleep on certain parts of your anatomy. I'm delighted to have been invited to share lessons that I've learned from my father and how I've spent my life living a life of faith and activism. And I want to share with you three things that I learned from my dad. One, I want to share some of the proverbs. Secondly, some of the stories. And thirdly, some of the music that my father taught us. Let's get started. To start with then, the Proverbs. So my father's Proverbs included, if a task is once begun, never quit until it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. And that was a proverb that he taught us early in life about the importance of working, the importance of starting the task, and not just starting it, but once you start it, to do it until you complete it, and then finally, once it's completed, make sure it was done well. And so the proverbs that my father taught, my father would never tell you to go to the store. He'd tell you a little proverb or a story or sing a song to you, and you'd get up and go to the store. Well, these proverbs that I learned from my father will always be a part of my life. And so the first one, if a task is once begun, never quit until it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. The importance of work, the importance of committing yourself to what you do, the importance of finishing what you do and making sure that when you finish well. A second proverb from my father was a proverb which reminded us that in terms of education, it's important that we be all that we could be. And so my father would say to us, you have to be greater and better than I have been. Now, my father at 10 years old left school, began to work, in fact, became the person who was responsible for his family. And during that time, he was the person who was the provider, he was the educator, he was also the person who ensured that all was well. So at 10 years old, he started to work and left school, and then for the next 70 years, spent all of his time basically working until he retired. And when he retired, went back to school and earned his high school diploma. My father's Proverbs, the proverb that meant so much to him in terms of his education, was that little proverb which reminded him that he could do the best that he could do only if he got as much education as was possible. A third proverb that I learned from my father was a proverb which says, every tub has to sit on its own bottom. Every tub has to sit on its own bottom. A reminder that each of us are responsible for our own behaviors, and we are accountable to somebody in terms of whatever that behavior is. Because every tub, sooner or later, will be held accountable for where it sits, and it has to sit on its own bottom. Now, I think about my father as the man who could share these proverbs and share them in a way that they made sense in light of our life's experiences. And one of those that I will always remember, and some of you have heard me recite it time and time again, be what you is and not what you ain't, because if you ain't what you is, then you is what you ain't. Be genuine, be real, Be true to whatever you are. Proverbs. So I learned lessons from my fathers through Proverbs. But I not only learned lessons from my father through Proverbs, but also through story. He was a master storyteller. I remember the day that my father first had the opportunity to serve on a jury. That means he had recently learned how and become a person who was registered to vote. And once he was registered to vote, he was called to serve on a jury. And he did some strange things that week. He took a bath in the middle of the week. We only bathed on Saturday night because we were farmers, and to bathe in the middle of the week didn't make sense, and it was a waste of precious resources called water. So my father took a bath in the middle of the week. He put on his iron black suit that was shining. He put on his necktie, cocked his hat to one side, got in his 1949 Ford, and drove into town to serve on a jury. The case he was working on was a young man accused of selling illegal drugs. Illegal drugs in those days was only marijuana. These other drugs that we have nowadays are much more common, but certainly did not exist. So the young man was accused of selling illegal drugs. And the judge said to the jury, this lawyer says he did it, this lawyer says he didn't do it, and the two lawyers cannot agree about whether he did it or not. So I'd like you as a jury to listen to the facts and then decide whether the young man is guilty of selling illegal drugs or not. So my father says the jury listened to the case, and this lawyer argued he did it, and this lawyer argued he didn't, and finally the judge said, you now as a jury go and decide. And they went in and they argued and they debated and they talked and they discussed and they reasoned and they argued one with the other, and finally they came back and said to the judge, we cannot decide. And the judge said, try one more time. And they walked in the jury room, and my father said to the jury, let me tell you a story. Two men went bird hunting. This is the story my father was telling. Two men went bird hunting, and they got their guns, their stacks, and their bullets, and they walked in the woods hunting and intending to have bird for dinner. After a while, one of the bird hunters noticed a pretty bluebird, and he said to the other one, there he is, shoot him. And he said, no, you never shoot a pretty bluebird. They walked on a bit further, and the other hunter saw a pretty red bird, and he said to his partner, there he is, shoot him. And he said, no, you never shoot a pretty red bird. And then all of a sudden they realized that it was getting late in the afternoon and they don't have anything to eat. No bird for dinner. And all of a sudden, both of the bird hunters heard at the same time. And one of them said, there he is, shoot him. And the other one said, no, you don't have to shoot him. You just let him keep pecking. Woodpeckers are known to die mysteriously because they run into a tree that's hard and they keep pecking and pecking and pecking until they finally kill themselves. Almost a year to the date, the same young man accused of selling illegal drugs was sentenced to 50 years in the Georgia State Penitentiary for having a ton of marijuana. Just let him keep pecking. My dad told the jury that story, and they said to the judge, let him go. And almost year to the date, the story came true, and the young man was sentenced. Stories. I was talking to my daughter one day. I drove her to school every day when she went to school. And I was talking to her one day, and she had a bad habit. And I was talking to her about her bad habit. And on the way to school, I said to her, can I tell you a story? She said, oh, Daddy, there you go again. And I said, but really, can I tell you a story? I said, it's about the jazz. And she said, oh, yes, tell me a story about the jazz. I want to hear that story about the jazz. And I said, the jazz was playing the Bulls. And it's the last few minutes of the game. And the whistle blows and the jazz rushes off to this side and the Bulls rush off to that side. And then the whistle blows again and both teams rush out on the court, and Scottie Pippen is standing on the corner with the ball in his hand, trying to find somebody to throw it to. My daughter said, why didn't he throw it to Michael? I said, oh, yeah, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson, that'd be a great person to throw the ball to. She said, no, Daddy, not Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan. And she said, well, why didn't he throw it to Michael Jordan? He's the only one in the last few seconds of the game who could have caught the ball, made the shot, and won the game. And I said to my daughter, Michael was sitting on the sideline. And she said, oh, I'm mad with him. He's sitting on the sideline when the game is hanging in the balances. And I said, that's the way the Davis family feels. When you come home in the afternoon and you get your plate and you put a piece of fried chicken on it and some collard greens with cornbread and a little bit of rice, and you get a big glass full of red Kool-Aid and disappear in your room, slam the door, and the sign on the door says, private, knock before you enter, in my house. And I told her that story that afternoon. She came home from school. She went in the kitchen, dropped a book bag by the door, got a plate, put a piece of chicken on, fried chicken, collard greens, rice and cornbread, and a big slice of sweet potato pie, and a glass of red Kool-Aid, and sat down at the table and ate with the family. Storytelling. There's some wonderful lessons to be learned about communicating across generations. She was a youngster and I was an old man, but you can tell stories and communicate in ways that otherwise would be offensive. But then thirdly, we learned from my dad real early that music was important. In fact, he had a little proverb that said, every bird can sing except the buzzard. Every bird can sing except the buzzard. And tune and timing is not so important as what you're singing about. I remember the day that my son decided that girls existed. I went to his room, turned on his boombox, and he was listening to soft, sweet music about girls. But I can also tell you the day that he decided that girls were second to automobiles. I turned on his boombox, and he was listening to loud, rambunctious music about speeding wheels and spinning tires. And as he listened to that music, I knew that I didn't have anything to worry about, because girls were now second to automobiles. Well, he became a track star, and as he ran track here in Salt Lake City, Utah, he won every track meet that he entered. He decided to do individualized track events. And each time he would go out on the track to run track, he had these things growing out of his ears. And I'd look at him and wonder, what does he have? Why is that stuff? Why are those little black lines growing out of his ears? And when they'd call his number and it was time for him to run, he'd take those things that was growing out of his ears and the little box that was hanging on his shoulder, and he'd lay it aside, and he'd go out and they'd pop the gun and he'd run and win. So one day I decided I was going to check out what those little things were that was growing out of his ears and what he was doing with it. And so I went over after he left it and picked it up and let it let them grow out of my ears for a while and listen to the music. And it was music about winning and being the best that you could be and not allowing anybody else to outdo you when you're on the track. And he never lost a track meet. By the way, he's now an old man. He holds the Penn State record, Penn University records in his track events. Still the records here in Salt Lake City. He holds those records. But he deep pulled his hamstring qualifying for the Olympics. And now all he can do is dress up in his track uniform and sit down and watch television, the track meets. Music. There are 3 lessons that I shall always remember that help me to live a life of faith and activism. Number 1, learn how to share proverbs. Number 2, learn how to tell stories. And number 3, learn how to sing. Because every bird can sing except a buzzard.